Hello, my name is Kara Appleton, and I'm with the International Students and Scholars Center, and we have Olivia Fallon with us from Career and Professional Development Services, and really happy to have her in through Zoom to help us with our networking fundamentals. And if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to ask in the chat. Happy to answer those. And you can, at the end, we'll unmute ourselves if we have questions you want to ask it on audio. But Olivia, we're really grateful you're here, and take it away. I'll turn my video off.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you all for having me. So yeah, today I'll be talking about networking. So some different networking strategies, and then also how to leverage your LinkedIn account to network. And my computer can be a little slow, so just bear with me. Like Kara said, my name's Olivia Fallon. I work as a career and industry specialist here at ASU. I specifically work on the Tempe campus, but we have offices at all the different campuses. On the Tempe campus specifically, our office is in the Student Services building on the 3rd level. I find a lot of students have no idea where we're located, so that's where we are on the Tempe campus. And then we're also in Armstrong Hall on the Tempe campus as well. And just a little bit about me, excuse me, I've been with ASU about 9 months now. I moved here from South Carolina, and I've been in career services a little over probably 2.5 years. So I've been in this field for a little bit, not that long, but long enough, I guess. So kind of an overview, I'll talk about what is networking, some of the benefits, strategies, we'll go over elevator pitch, and then LinkedIn. So with any presentation, we always like to start it off with the 8 career competencies. So these are essentially transferable skills that employers look for regardless of your major or industry. So NACE, which stands for the National Association of Colleges and Employers, surveys companies throughout the United States every single year and asks what are the top skills you're looking for in your new hires. And this is a list that surfaced for 2019. And so we have problem solving and critical thinking, written and verbal communication, leadership, digital technology, career management, teamwork and collaboration, professionalism and work ethic, and global and intercultural fluency. And so if you ever have an interview, this is a good list to like look at if you're preparing, because likely they're going to ask you questions like, tell me about some of your leadership experience, tell me a time you had to problem solve or think on your feet, stuff like that. Additionally, for 2019, the #1 desired skill was actually problem solving and critical thinking. So you can be sure that will probably be brought up in interviews and conversations with employers. So the goal of today's presentation is to learn what networking is, why it's important, and the steps involved to succeed. And we'll skip past this since this is virtual. So what is networking and why is it important? Networking is ultimately creating relationships with professionals, family members, friends, and I think ultimately it should be mutually beneficial. And so the textbook definition is a deliberate activity to build, reinforce, and maintain relationships of trust. And so I find that a lot of students see networking as like, how can you help me? But they don't see it as like this reciprocal relationship. And I think networking at its best is when you're both helping each other, whether that be, you know, someone connects you with like your dream employer, and then maybe you have the skills to help them interview, or, you know, whatever, like it's where you're both helping each other out. I also think networking, it's important to maintain those relationships. So like maybe you meet someone at a networking event and you had a great interaction with them. I would say it's equally important to follow up with them, you know, a couple months later, just to ensure that you're maintaining that relationship. And networking in the United States is particularly important because 80% of jobs are gotten through networking. So I would say when you're job searching, it's often about who you know, not what you know. And obviously you need to know something if you're going to get hired, but a lot of people, you know, make good grades, are very academically involved. And so sometimes what it really boils down to is, do you know someone in that company that can vouch for you? Because then you're sort of less of a liability if someone already knows your work ethic, character, integrity, stuff like that. So just a couple of do's and don'ts of networking. Again, you do want to follow up. I would say that's one of the most important steps. It's not enough to just, you know, have a good interaction and not be that. You do want to follow up, whether that be on LinkedIn, shooting them a message, an email, what have you. You don't want to overzealously self-promote. So I think a key to, you know, a positive interaction is being just as interested in the person you're talking to as they are in you. I remember I went to a networking event, I think it was my junior year of college, and I was at a networking mixer and I met this guy and he asked me one question and I think it was like, oh, so what do you do? And it felt very much like an interview and less like a conversation. And so I kind of just gave like a quick overview, like I'm in college, I'm in student government. And then immediately he jumped into like, I'm a triple major, I have 5 internships, I'm good friends with the president. He went to Penn State. And I just remember that being like such a negative interaction. And obviously that's a more extreme example, but I think anytime you're going to these type of events, you want to be just as interested in the person talking as you are in talking about your own accomplishments and experience. Do prepare questions. So I would recommend, even prior to the networking event, career fair, thinking of questions you want to ask prior to that interaction, and maybe even writing it down, whether that be in your phone, in your portfolio, on a notepad. I know at the career fair specifically, they already put out the list of employers that are going to be there. So I would definitely recommend looking at that ahead of time and then go ahead and writing down questions. And if nothing else, it just makes you look more prepared that you had the foresight to do that. Don't only speak to one person. This is probably something I hear from recruiters the most when they attend career fairs and networking events, is that it looks like students kind of just circulate around, but they don't oftentimes or sometimes have the confidence to stop and talk to a recruiter. They're human too. I wouldn't like, I know it can be a little nerve-wracking, but you might as well make the most of your time while you're there and talk to them. And then lastly, do listen. So this obviously seems kind of like obvious, but I would say it's very important that when you are engaging with a recruiter, another professional, that you really make it a point to listen. You're nodding your head, you know, you're actively engaging, you're leaning forward, because I can say as someone who works in career services, it's very evident when someone is just talking to you to like hand you their resume or get their business card and they're not really engaged in what you have to say. So again, all these different do's and don'ts to sort of leave a good impression. So a big piece of networking is creating an elevator pitch. So an elevator pitch is essentially, you know, a minute to a minute 30 spiel or introduction about who you are as a professional. I find elevator pitches to be helpful because you can use them not only at networking events, but also like when I was in grad school, I had like an elevator pitch I would go to as like my go-to introduction. It's very short, very concise. It essentially explains, you know, who you are, your professional goals, and maybe just a couple of skills that you have that are related to those goals. I will say if you are at like a career fair or networking event, it's important not to get to do a deep dive into like industry specific jargon or knowledge, because oftentimes recruiters don't have as deep of a knowledge of those different industry terms. They're more so responsible for just hiring on people. So it's important to use layman's terms when you are interacting with recruiters. And we won't do this activity obviously, but I would recommend in your own free time, maybe writing down your elevator pitch. So again, it should be about a minute in length and really just cover who you are, maybe your major, and sort of the opportunities you're looking for. I think it's also good to add on a question that you want to ask the recruiter. So maybe think of like the elevator pitch and then think about like, you know, what is the first thing I want to ask them to sort of kick off the conversation. And so these are some quick examples that I think are pretty solid elevator pitches. So one is, I have a decade's worth of experience in accounting, working primarily with small and mid-sized firms. If your company is ever in need of an extra set of hands, I'll be thrilled to consult. So very short, concise, but it conveys the message. Another one, I create illustrations for websites and brands. My passion is coming up with creative ways to express a message, and drawing illustrations that people share on social media. So again, very concise. Your elevator pitch doesn't need to be a deep dive, just very sort of to the point. And in fact, elevator pitch, that whole buzzword is derived from like, if you're on the elevator with like a CEO or someone in like your dream company and you have a couple seconds to get across what you want to, what is that going to be? What's most important to convey? So now we're going to talk about some different strategies of networking. So I would say, honestly, one of the best strategies is informational interviewing. So informational interviewing is essentially an informal conversation with someone that's either in your ideal job or working at your ideal company. And it's just typically a 20 to 30-minute phone call, and you just ask them, you know, what did you major in? What did you do your internships in? What does a typical day look like in this role? How would you describe your company culture? If you could do anything differently, what would that be? It's just a good way to get a insider's view into a certain position. I personally do informational interviews almost on a weekly basis, and I find them to be extremely helpful. And also, I'll add, informational interviews aren't about like getting a job. So in your interview, you don't want to say like, oh, I'm actually job searching. Are you all hiring? You don't want to do that. In fact, that's a deterrent for some professionals to even want to meet with you, because they know you have ulterior motives. You're not necessarily interested in learning about their job. However, I will add that if you have a good interaction with them, it's not uncommon for them to say like, oh, we'll bring you in for an interview. In fact, one of my good friends did an informational interview with an engineering company here in Phoenix, and he was an international student, and they really enjoyed talking with him and offered him an interview, and he now is he's a full-time employee of that company. So needless to say, it pays off, and that's not that uncommon. I know quite a few people that have scored internships and jobs from just those like little small interactions. And like I said, get advice and information only. So you don't want it to all seem like you're just talking with them to get an internship, because then that just kind of feels like you're using them. It really should just be about building your network and learning about their job. And if you do get offered an interview, then that's amazing, but that's sort of like the icing on the cake. So some of the benefits: you gain firsthand knowledge about the field and how to best prepare. It's a good way to learn about other career paths. So maybe you meet with someone and, you know, their job seems interesting, but it doesn't seem like quite the right fit. It's a good time to ask, like, what are some other similar career paths to this role? Because if anyone's going to know, it'll probably be them. And it's also a good way to gain knowledge about a specific company. So maybe you're interested in working at Microsoft. Even if your informational interview is with someone that isn't in your like dream role, they're still going to have a lot of insight on the interviewing process, on what it's like to work there on a day-to-day basis, the culture. So there's a ton of benefits to informational interviews, and it's typically a lot less intimidating than going to a mixer or career fair. So anytime you do have an interaction with an employer, with a recruiter, or other companies, I always recommend doing as much research as you can prior, given if you know who's going to be there. Because I've personally worked with recruiters that have said it can be a little exhausting when like student after student after student is like, tell me about your company, which you could, of course, like Google before you even walk up to that booth or recruiter. So if you're able to, I would recommend just doing a quick amount of research, maybe looking up the company on Glassdoor, looking at their mission, vision, values on their company website, looking at their social media pages. All of those different things can give you good insight into that company. And furthermore, I would say your conversation with the recruiter or professional will thus be enriched because you have some basis of knowledge to talk about. And then if you do want to set up an informational interview, you typically reach out through email or phone or through LinkedIn. I usually do it through LinkedIn, and I'll go through this process in a second. But again, in that initial message, you want to just reiterate that it's only for information gathering so that they know, again, this isn't you asking for a job or internship. So I like to include some sample questions you can ask. So some of the ones I like to ask are like, to what extent do they feel their experiences are typical of others? So maybe you're informationally interviewing a software developer at Google. I don't know. I think it's good to ask, like, do you think your job is pretty similar at other companies, or do you think this is a very unique role here? That way you can kind of gauge, how many other informational interviews you should do. Another good question, could they give you names of people that may be able to provide additional information? I think this is one of the most important questions you can ask, and typically you would ask this at the end. So I'll always say, like, is there anyone else you can connect me with so that I can learn more about this field or this job? And then it's a lot easier to set up additional informational interviews when you already have that warm handoff. Yeah, and that's pretty much that. And then follow up. So anytime you do meet with a professional for coffee, over the phone, it's always good to send them like a thank you email or a thank you note. Thank you email is honestly fine. I would recommend scheduling like a reminder in your calendar prior to the informational interview so that you don't forget, because otherwise I think it's really easy to forget once you've kind of gotten through that interview. And if you do send a thank you note, which you should, it should be within 1 to 2 business days. You don't want like a week or 2 to pass by and then you follow up. It should be a fairly timely thank you. And it can be very concise, thank you for your time. I really enjoyed talking with you. Maybe highlight 1 to 2 things you learned. Very simple. And then again, if you really did follow their advice, I would recommend reaching out again within a couple of months and just saying, thanks again for meeting with me. I actually ended up taking your advice and, whatever happened with that. Again, just a good way to maintain and build that relationship. So one tool to use is ASU Mentor Network. So this is essentially a website that's very similar to LinkedIn, but it's specifically designed for ASU alums, current students, staff, faculty, and community members. It's very user-friendly, so they'll actually craft the message for you based on what you want to discuss, whether that be major exploration, career exploration. It like already preemptively crafts that question or that interaction. Excuse me. And the URL for that is mentorship.asu.edu. When you log in, this is what it looks like. So you kind of get a dashboard and it'll actually recommend people for you to reach out to based on your major, your professional interests, where you want to live in the country. And so I think that's an incredibly helpful feature as well. And then you can actually further filter out mentors or professionals based on their industry expertise, based on their major. So if you are both psychology majors, maybe you want to live in Los Angeles, you can look up everyone that lives in that city. And then there's additional other filters as well. So again, very helpful. resource. So now we're going to talk about LinkedIn, and I'll actually stop sharing my screen and then share my LinkedIn account. Just give me 1 second. Sorry, 1 moment. Okay, here we go. Okay, so on your LinkedIn, you really want it to be pretty thoroughly filled out. So I'm just gonna go to my profile. Kind of going from top to bottom, you want your header photo, which mine is probably not the best example, but you want your header photo to correlate with your industry that you're in. So for an example, I think the CEO of like United Airlines or American Airlines has a plane in their header. If you go on Google, you can actually just type in free LinkedIn headers, and I'll have a whole like database of pictures that you can use that are really high quality, which is nice. And LinkedIn honestly is one of the best platforms you can use to virtually network and just network in general. So highly recommend creating an account if you don't have one. Another thing with LinkedIn, I would recommend shortening your URL. So this is the URL. As you can see, it's just my first and last name. The way you shorten that is on the right-hand side, edit public profile and URL, and then just trim off the extra digits. Because typically with your LinkedIn URL, you do want to copy and paste that onto your resume, cover letter, so that employers can quickly look you up. And that URL would just go with your contact information, so your email, phone number, city, and state. What else? So on LinkedIn, you can also show recruiters you're open to job opportunities, which is really nice because then they'll just reach out to you based on whatever opportunities you're interested in. Your about me should be fairly, well, ultimately, you can, some people do like talk about themselves in first person in their about me. Other people will talk about themselves in third person, I think is the term. Like Olivia, blah, blah, blah. So I would just say, try to use really descriptive verbs or adjectives describing yourself as a professional. If you're obviously still a student, maybe you can talk about some of your professional goals, but I would try to highlight some of your skills as well, and not just the opportunities you're looking for. And then in your experience, so this is going to be pretty much copy and pasted from your resume. You just want to put your title, the organization, and then bullet pointing out your responsibilities. And just like your resume, you want to make sure the verbiage is in the correct tense. So if you no longer are employed there, make sure it's advised, served, or if you currently work there, serve, advise. And you'll want to do that for all of your different positions. And then at the end, you'll add your education. You can also endorse people on LinkedIn, which is really cool. So maybe you want to highlight if you're, I don't know, in engineering, you have experience with MATLAB, Six Sigma, what have you. You can list all those different skills. And then recommendations. So maybe you worked with someone who is particularly impactful. You can write them a recommendation or ask for one. And also highlight your interests. So I would say the biggest thing with LinkedIn is just having it thoroughly filled out. It really doesn't even take that long. And with your professional headshot, so we actually offer free headshots at the career fair every fall almost. So last fall, I think the Washington Street Journal came on campus and did professional headshots for free. So I would highly, highly recommend taking advantage of that. Typically paying for your own headshot is hundreds of dollars. It's very expensive if you got it professionally done on your own. So might as well take advantage of that free resource. I'll go ahead and stop share and go back to the presentation.
Hey, Olivia?
Yeah.
Will you search me and pull up mine just for
Sure.
a different reference?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, maybe I see the chat, the Washington Post. Maybe that was Washington something. I don't know. A popular journalism company. But yeah, let me pull yours up.
I don't know if we're connected.
I don't know. I think
There I am. It pulled me up.
there we go. I think we are, yeah, we are.
Okay. So yeah, I stole that photo from International Student Commencement.
Oh, cool.
Access to that to ASU photos. So, and that's an old photo of me, but for a job description, I did a little different than Olivia. I did like I constantly update that because
Mhm.
if you change jobs, you want to be able to like say past tense versus present. So I
Mhm.
currently develop and oversee events. And then I've added photos where I've been doing stuff. That looks really good. Say you've won an award.
Mhm.
Upload a photo of you winning that award or you're recognized at work for something.
Yeah.
That's really helpful too.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point. If you do have any like photos, if you have an e-portfolio, anything like that, I think it's good to attach that. So yeah, that's great. I would recommend though, I've seen some people attach their resume on LinkedIn. I probably wouldn't do that because typically that has like your phone number, like more personal information.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
Like general pictures, portfolios, all that looks really great and a lot more well filled out. Yeah, cool.
So
Yeah,
there's just
I
different
use
ways to
Chapel
build
Hill.
it out. There's no wrong way. Olivia's was great too. So this is just a different sample.
Right, for sure.
And people endorse you, and so you got to pay it forward and endorse other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, and then recommendations, that's always really nice. Languages, so if you speak multiple languages, that's a good thing to highlight as well. Um, yeah. Yeah, Wall Street Journal. But yeah, I think they're the company that comes on campus and takes those pictures. But cool. Yeah, I always forget you're from North Carolina. That's so funny.
I did my grad program there, so
Mm.
cool. Anyway.
All right, let me go back to the presentation. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I think it's good to see multiple examples. Oh my goodness, I forgot the one thing. Okay, let me go back really quick. So LinkedIn has a really cool alumni feature. So let's go back. So on LinkedIn, if you type in Arizona State University, it'll load. It's been kind of slow today. And then click on the alumni button on the left-hand side. This loads over 300,000 plus alumni that are on our platform that went to ASU. So maybe you're in the boat of like, how do I find these people to network with or connect with or informationally interview? This is the #1 tool I use. So maybe you're interested in working at Microsoft as an example. You'll see all these different people that currently are employed at Microsoft, and you'll literally hit connect and then add a note introducing yourself and saying like, hey, do you have 20 minutes where I could just learn more about your professional experience? I look forward to hearing from you. Very simple. And again, people are pretty receptive to following up with you because I think that alumni connection. Equally, I have some students that maybe they're interested. Like I had a student that really wants to move to Paris when she graduates from ASU. So she specifically looked for people based on location, not so much job, just so that she could learn about, professional culture in France, things of that nature. So there's a lot of different ways you can use this platform, but I find this to be super helpful. And I'm just going to stop share. Okay. So yeah, those are one of many ways that you can find people to reach out to. LinkedIn, ASU Mentor Network, just going to the company website. There's a lot of different ways. And just some final tips. So I would recommend dressing professionally. So this ultimately is subjective based on the industry you're in. So if you're in a more conservative or mainstream industry, I would say generally the expectation is wearing like a cardigan or blazer or short sleeve or long sleeve shirt. More, I don't want to say muted colors, but you don't want to wear anything that's like neon, crazy if you're in a more conservative field. Slacks, skirts that typically go to or right above your knees, closed-toed shoes. This is like real conservative, so take this with a grain of salt. Obviously do research on your own industry, but these are some general good best practices. I would also recommend, if you ever have any free money laying around, maybe getting a Padfolio. Those generally aren't too expensive. You can get them from Walmart, and they're essentially like a leather, sort of like a leather folder, and you can put a notepad in it, put in documents, a pen, excuse me, a pen, and they look good to bring to an interview, to an event, and you can also pre-write your questions. Sorry, I have like an itch in my throat. Okay. My friend is creeping on my presentation. Anyways, so those are some of the best practices, and as you can see on the slide, with the cardigan, longer skirt, things of that nature. I would recommend wearing shoes that you're comfortable in. I've been to numerous networking events, career fairs here at ASU and Clemson, where women especially will wear like 10-inch heels, and you can tell they're like brand new and they're breaking them in, and you like walk, you know, not as comfortably. So you want to feel confident. You want to wear like clothing and shoes that are well broken in, that you can walk well in. So that's a little side note as well. Some last final tips: bring copies of your resume. Even better if you can print your resume out on resume paper. So you can get resume paper from Staples, Walmart. It's literally just a thicker, yellower copy or grade of paper. It's not a huge deal, but I have worked with students that printed their resume on resume paper and it stood out in the stack and they got an interview. Like one recruiter was like, your resume stood out, so we decided we'd interview you just for that. So, because most students print it out on copy paper. So talk to everyone everywhere. Again, networking really is not limited to formal events. It can happen in Starbucks. It can happen in a club that you join. You know, you don't want to limit yourself. If you do conduct an informational interview or a meeting with someone in person, I always think it's a good practice just to offer to pay for their coffee if they took time out to meet with you. Generally speaking, most full-time professionals are going to pay anyways if it's a student that's conducting the informational interview, but it's still a nice gesture to offer if they did take, you know, half an hour out of their schedule to talk more about their career with you. And that's sort of networking in a nutshell. And we always finish it off with the sooner you start, the further you'll go. And then what's one thing you'll do in the next 24 hours to sort of take the right step towards networking, path to success.
So if anybody has questions for Olivia or myself, feel free to ask them in the chat. Or if you do have a resume you want reviewed. Olivia, did you talk about the Dropbox and things like that?
I didn't. So we have something called a resume Dropbox. Essentially, like if you literally just go on Google, type in ASU resume Dropbox, you can just submit it virtually and then you get feedback within 2 to 4 business days. And we're pretty caught up right now, so you'll get feedback pretty quickly. So that's a good way if you don't want to schedule an appointment with our office, you just want feedback.
Really cool feature. So it doesn't look like any questions are coming in. I'll do a shameless plug for Coffee and Conversation next. We're talking about Easter traditions, and there'll be a fun game to play via Kahoot. So thank you so much for attending. I hope this was helpful to you. We have workshops going on over the next couple weeks for the remainder of the semester, and then over the summer we'll also have some workshops we'll keep you updated on. So thank you, Olivia. Thanks for your time. And we hope to see you all soon.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you all for having me. Have a good and safe weekend.
Bye.